I'm starting recording right away in case we say something smart or intelligent. I mean, the best,
It's always good to catch that stuff.
right? The best part was not captured, and that was the other frame where you're leaning forward and your massive biceps and triceps were so intimidating. I asked you to sit under the table like this.
I feel that my mansplaining is being a little aggressive for you. I'm sorry about that. I'm
Yes.
sorry that my manliness is offending you.
It is. You're a giant of a man, and let's not go there, dude. So you just had me on your show, and we were just talking about the pandemic, and I don't want to. I actually wanted to have you on the show to talk about you and your mindset and your philosophy and stuff like that. But there's no way we can not talk about what the fuck is going on now. So do you want to talk about that now in the beginning or after?
No, let's do it. Let's just get it out of the way.
Okay, that's all I have to say about it. Let's move on. I'm kidding. Dude, what the fuck, right? We went from pandemic to...
These are strange times. And, I think it's an old, there's a Chinese proverb that says, may you live in interesting times, which I always took as like kind of a positive. But then when it was explained to me that it's actually not a positive, it's a negative, that you want to live in like peaceful times. You don't want to live in times of turmoil. You want your crops to grow. You don't want to have to start trying to figure things out. And I think we are living in some of the most interesting times, at least in our lives.
My God, yes. Understatement.
We've gone from this kind of like global epidemic where we're going to shut down a world economy because of, this fear, this unknown, this, coronavirus that, people couldn't get ahead of. And, they're making projections like 2 million people will die, and all this stuff's going through. And, now all of a sudden here we are. I mean, what was that in March? And here we are 3 months later in June, and like none of this, I guess you could say, like forecasting came to fruition. And now all of a sudden, not even close. But then I saw today, I mean, I read a study, a month ago that talked about, they had 455 people that they followed that had been involved with asymptomatic people, and 0 of those people tested positive in any form or way for COVID-19. So the asymptomatic thing was just really, really interesting. So,
right.
I mean,
right.
And the fear that people were having, I mean, you're sending police out to, arrest people for for letting their kids play outside, and like, and then you're getting up and Trump's giving these daily, reflections, and you got this Fauci dude and like, Bill Gates. And I think they really played upon people's fears, and that the idea that, your neighbor could potentially be carrying something that could kill you, that you can't see, this invisible fear. And it just, the way to avoid it is don't have any contact. So hide in home, shelter in place.
Right.
And now it's coming out that's like, it doesn't live for 16 hours on surfaces, and asymptomatic people can't pass it. And we were really off about the numbers, because I think when you look at the numbers, what did they say? If you're like in a retirement home in New York, was like 58% of all the deaths were like within that kind of like group. And for healthy individuals, it was not even a headache. So I don't know, man. It's like, do people want to believe in the worst? Like there's a whole, and I forgot what it's called, but there's this idea that, these are the worst times we've ever lived in. Nothing's been this bad. And I think it's a kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yeah. It's, there was a really good meme pre-protest, riot, looting, arson, murder, right? Just after the murder hornets got shut down, right?
COVID, murder hornets, riots.
Right. And it's okay, guys, cancel the murder hornets. Let's go right to fucking bedlam and mayhem. But there was a really powerful post on one of those like history pages that just, talked about the Spanish flu, World War I, World War II, and just all the different things that we've all gotten through. I don't think, and those are powerful if you read into it, is that we are adaptive. There's no pterodactyls on the call, right? The dinosaurs are gone. It's humans. We're here. We adapt. And when you look at the Black Plague, or you look at this war that went on for 100 years in some country, 1,000 years ago, or whatever, if people had memes and social media, they'd be doing like, what the fuck? These are the worst of times, they wouldn't be thinking like, this is interesting. I don't think anyone, during Spanish flu went, wow, John, this is interesting, isn't this, right? So,
Well, I think we've, like the quote that keeps resonating is, difficult times make strong men, strong make easy times make weak men make hard times.
right,
I think we're in a situation where uh, everything is so good that and if like I was kind of laughing a little bit when they asked who was it um, the guy from Tesla,
Musk.
yeah, Elon Musk. They asked him like, "Hey, what do you think's going to happen when the AI comes online and like this?" And he paused and he's like, or like, "What question do you want to ask?" And he's like, "What's outside the simulation?" And
Mm,
I was kind of laughing a little bit, being like, okay, if like this was a Matrix like simulation, um, and they knew like from the original, like when you see the movie that they tried to make everybody successful and it failed and they lost this deal, so they had to build in this strife and this emotion and this and once they did that and not everybody was rich and a superstar, then everybody was fine. And
mm,
like as he said that, all I thought was like, man, is this a simulation running trying to build fear? Because they know, one, I mean, and Tony, you know this, like the media is a for-profit. They are not nonprofits. They're not these, social, um, platforms that are dedicated to providing us this information to help us grow as a species. I mean, they are predicated on money and they are built as financial models. So they know that, I mean, drama sells. I mean, the
right.
more violent, the more explosive, the more, da-na-na, na-na-na, this stuff comes out. I mean, that NFL ticker, I know as an ex-NFL player, that ticker, that line that goes on the bottom of ESPN, da-na-na, that's the last thing you wanted to be on. If you saw your name on there, it was either because you were cut or got involved in something you shouldn't have been in.
Right.
And they run that thing 24 hours a day, so I just think we're in a really interesting thing where people have kind of given up any civil discourse, and there's really no rational conversations to be had, and there's no, there's this kind of polarizing, vulcanizing, right and wrong, and unfortunately, people don't want to be on the wrong side of history.
It's interesting that, there was I don't know if did I post the meme today. It was, no, I forgot to. Just this whole idea of like you're, the only opinion that anyone wants to hear is, their opinion coming out of your mouth. It was
Yeah.
kind of like that. You can't say anything that your silence is violence
Yeah, but
and
words are violence. So if
right,
silence is violence and words are violence and words are weapons, then I'm kind of confused by, like anybody, like we've gotten into this cancel culture where it's, if you don't have my view, then, and my view is the righteous one, then you are not allowed to have that view. And if you are, then I have to get rid of you. I have to exercise you that,
right,
and I always remember, as you know, or maybe the people on your show don't know, I'm a Berkeley graduate. So, I mean, I lived in probably ground zero for, not only what you saw within the 60s and the revolution and, with that movement and, just some really interesting times within that. And it's funny at Berkeley, they refer to the 60s and that kind of times as like the revolution. And I
mm,
always thought that was ironic because I'm like, when they first talked about it, I was like, American Revolution? They're like, no, it was the 60s in Berkeley. It was a revolution. I'm like,
huh,
it was this cultural awakening, cultural revolution. And I'm like, sure, okay, if that's part of the history.
right,
But I remember somebody defining, liberty and, the ability to stand here and, stand on a milk crate and scream at the top of your lungs, something that somebody else would stand on a milk crate and scream back at you for a lifetime in opposition. And like that's that's the liberty of our country, that you're allowed to have this opinion and you're able to voice it. And I might not like it and I can argue with you and think you're a dick, but at the end of the day, like that's what makes America great, was this discourse, this idea of taking conflicting ideas and arguing them and trying to find some middle ground. And we've gotten to the point where I don't think there is a middle ground on anything anymore. It's either black or white, this, and it's become just so vulcanized that I don't even, I don't know how we go back in time to where it's like, I get it. Like, don't be a dick. Like, like we don't have a place in this country for racists or bigots. I get that. But, not everybody's a bad guy. So let's
right,
hear what everybody has to say. And like, just cancel culture and, firebombing and, gaslighting and all these terms. I just don't think it does anything, because all it does is make people go further into their burrow and, armor themselves up even more. And then they become less likely to ever, be able to exchange ideas.
Yeah, no, 100% agree. Somebody sent me a private message today, and out of confidentiality, I just posted an excerpt. But what she said was that one of the scariest things that she saw was political leaders submitting to Antifa. Have you seen those images of the police chief like lying on his stomach with his hands behind his back for 9 minutes to
I mean, but so there's I have a hard time, I think Antifa is a kind of a Marxist anarchist organization, and I think what they've done is they've attached themselves into this Black Lives Matter group, and I think they don't have the same agenda, and I think they're kind of piggybacking off of it, and I think there's like a Marxist anarchist agenda that they're kind of using. I think the Black Lives Matter people are, legitimately trying to, move the needle in terms of a kind of a cultural social revolution, and that there's this, problem that needs to be addressed. And I think that there's hopefully some, I think there's a lot of legitimacy to, hey, like, these are problems that we need to address, and we need to listen and have conversations. The problem is that those guys show up, and then there's these other guys that have showed up almost, dressing just like them with Molotov cocktails and, billy clubs, and looking to assault people and, create riots and this. And I think if anything, it's kind of, it's hurting their movement. And I think because then people see the fires, they see the looting, and they see this, and it just, and people think, man, this is a bad deal.
There are parts of that for me, and I'm just being a contrarian right now, but also observing, that are just too coordinated for it to be, coincidental.
Spontaneous.
Yeah. And then there are elements that I've seen, and I don't, now when I post things or share things, I always have like a little disclaimer. I don't know if this is true or not, but I thought I would share it, and because everything is like doctored and faked.
Well, how do you know? I mean, right. Anytime I see that there's like a coordination of pallets of bricks on corners, like somebody had to order those, somebody had to deliver them, somebody had to put routes together. So it's pretty interesting to see when this thing popped up, how well coordinated those groups were, if you're a fan, if you're a fan of history, you can take a look and say, you know what, this is probably stuff. This is a game plan that the U.S. government's probably run in terms of how to destabilize countries. I mean, you think about, the freedom fighters and us going in and arming and, training and giving aid to these groups that, fight against what we view as tyranny. And it feels maybe a lot like whatever our game plan was in that environment, that it's getting run on us.
That, or like, that's just the anarchists' workbook.
Yeah. The anarchist cookbook.
Yeah. It was, I saw some stuff on, on the racism piece, of course, 100%. The Black Lives Matters, some of the language that I'm seeing, and again, caveat, disclaimer, not sure if it's real or not, is like, we want to dismantle the police. We want to defund and dismantle the police. And we're not going to be happy if we do that. There was a videotape on the news of a guy who's one of the chapter leads or whatever, saying, hey, if de Blasio in New York doesn't take this seriously, we're going to just write out, like, it was like, I think it was on a clip on Tucker Carlson, where it was just like, hey, if you don't take us seriously, thanks to Donald Trump, gasoline is cheap right now, and we're going to go over the Diamond District and burn shit down. And it was like, I remember Tucker saying, like, they don't even care that they're saying this on TV. Yeah. Like, they're not even afraid of getting arrested. I mean, because they'll probably just get released the next day. But I don't know.
Well, I think people, I was kind of thinking on this, like, if you look at the struggles, I mean, if you look at like what's going on in Hong Kong right now, over there, and they're fighting against this. It's really interesting. You have a capitalist, constitutional republic, democracy, whatever you want to kind of label it. We're probably a little bit of both over here in this country. And you have anarchists, Marxists kind of tearing it down. And then you go over on the other side of the Pacific Ocean and you have these, freedom fighters that are fighting for liberty and like many of the things that, in the U.S. Constitution.
The American flag in Hong Kong.
Yeah, that are waving American flag. That are fighting against, Stalinist, Marxist, communist, regime. So there's some serious irony into this, but the pretty interesting thing, like if you look at and for those of you guys that are listening, you can Google this. If you go on YouTube and you look it up, I can't exactly remember, but if you basically look, there was a series of tapes from the 80s where KG operative, he defected and he filmed, and he went in and they actually released all the tapes. And what was pretty interesting, it was about the time of that Falcon and the Snowman. You remember that movie? Falcon and the Snowman? So there was historical significance for me because those guys lived in Palos Verdes, where I'm from. And they went to PB High, and it was kind of an interesting thing when that was a true story when that happened. My dad was mayor of Palos Verdes, and he just was like, there was a definite like change within the town. Like people moved in that hadn't been there before, and like there were just it was an interesting thing. And he always thought that it was in reaction to that. But that whole kind of like idea of the communists and selling secrets to Russia and all that espionage stuff really started. But there's a series of tapes and interview, and this guy goes through and talks about how you destabilize and the places that they go and how they do this, and like it's pretty much a game plan. And he's like, we don't care if it takes 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, or 100 years. At the end of the day, we'll push our agenda. And it's pretty chilling to watch, because if you think about this idea of like there's 330 million people in a country, there's going to be problems, but for the most part, people want to pay their taxes, they want to live their lives, they want to raise their children, and but unfortunately there's just a lot of things at play that but then you look at America and say, what is really America? A collection of a lot of different people. But then you look at the government. I mean, what's our greatest export? We export war. I mean, in the 240 years that the U.S. government or the United States has been in, I think we've been at peace like 21 years. So I don't know, man. There's just a lot of interesting things at play in this. I think, I don't know.
Why do you think so many people, for our greatest export is war? That's a controversial statement. Like, why do you think so many people, including bad actors, try to come here?
I think there's so much opportunity here. I mean, like I'm constantly amazed at the stories you hear where a guy shows up and has nothing and builds these empires. So I mean, I think more so than anything, I think America. I mean, and I firmly believe that, and I've traveled, I'm sure like you have, Tony, all over the world, that America, for every right or wrong and all this other stuff, is the greatest country on the planet.
Agreed.
And I know you're Canadian. My mom's Canadian, and she's always said, she's like, I don't know if people value America that were born here the same way people that do that come here and realize the American dream and make the oath. And I talked to Derek Woodsky about this recently. But the idea of like coming from another country and seeing it and coming in, he's like, those people tend to cherish and hold it in a higher regard, that I think people, become too far removed from this whole deal. And they don't realize exactly how bad it is in other places and how good we have it. So unfortunately, that's a bad deal.
Yeah, no, I've traveled a lot, and I've traveled in places where, with everything that I know about self-defense and situational awareness and improvised weapons, I was like, I'm not comfortable right now.
Yeah.
And
there's a lot of bad actors, there's a lot of bad people, and I just wonder if things have been too good for too long, and this is the way things get stirred up. And then you also wonder how the COVID kind of lockdown and the sheltering in place and 30% unemployment, people's businesses in here and being cooped up all of a sudden now predicates with this environment. So it's almost like now all of a sudden it was like social distancing, no more than this, and then all of a sudden you go out and there's 10,000 people at a rally right next to each other, but everybody's wearing masks. which is kind of convenient in a lot of ways.
Right, right. It's like, do robbers wear masks on top of their masks? So the you know, it was interesting, and I'm glad you brought up like that, because the government came out and the scientists came out and said, you know, uh, racism is as bad as COVID-19. And so, you know, yes, you still have, I use the term pseudo house arrest, you know, shelter in place, pseudo house arrest, and social distancing and wear a mask, unless you're protesting, looting, you know, setting things on fire, murdering people. Then if you need to murder somebody, you can get inside 6 feet. Okay. But otherwise, like it was so fucking absurd.
Well, don't you think that this is a little bit of like the snake coming back and biting them? I mean, you know, I was kind of thinking on this, like this whole kind of COVID deal, like the initial thing when they came out and they said, hey, we got to flatten the curve. So we're all got to stay at home. I bought in. I'm like, I completely understand. If this is going to put people in hospital rooms and it's going to overload the hospitals, then you know what? I understand shelter in place, stay at home makes sense for a couple of weeks. But then all of a sudden the hospitals are empty and they're laying people off and they're furloughing doctors and nurses and they're just sitting around waiting. They're turning people away for, you know, voluntary things. And it's like people are showing up with chest pains and they're sending them home because, you know, oh, we have to prepare for the coronavirus and for COVID-19. Right. They're going home and having heart attacks. So I understood that piece. Then all of a sudden the mission changed when it's like, oh, we have to avoid this. We have to eradicate it. We have to hide in place because out of fear for this thing. And I think like a level of distrust for the people that were pushing out this information, because people were like, wait a minute, I thought we were sheltering in place to flatten the curve and now it's changed, but nobody really explained that piece to me. Mm-hmm. So I think, you know, then you all of a sudden it's like, okay, we got to do this. And so you have these governors and you have, you know, the president and Fauci and all these guys come out. And then you see videos of like the local police going and arresting a mom because her kids are playing outside. And they're like, you know, you're not supposed to leave the house. Right. And unfortunately, the police become really the agent for the government. They're how most people interact with the government. I mean, you know, very few people, you know, they don't know their congressmen. They don't know their senators. You know, they don't see their mayor. Like really the police are the most forward facing members of within government. I mean, they're who we interact with. You see their cars. They're kind of the, you know, our number one touch point. And all of a sudden you see this stuff and they're like, it feels like they're enforcing tyranny. Yeah. You know, wait, hey, I'm an American citizen. I pay my taxes. The, you know, my right to life, liberty, be in the pursuit of happiness are guaranteed to me within the Constitution. And now you're telling me that I can't work to support my family. I can't go outside. I can't do the things that I want to do. I'm not allowed to have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness because we're staying at home because of a virus. Right. And there's nothing within the U.S. Constitution that says, hey, in event of a virus, you don't get any of your constitutional rights. And you have these governors and mayors and people standing up and being like, you know, the governor of New Jersey, basically, when they went to have a protest, said, you guys can't protest. Well, we have the right to assembly. This is guaranteed in the Constitution. And he's like, I'm not thinking about the Constitution. I don't care about the Constitution. You're not allowed to do this.
And everyone just listened.
Yeah, he never listened. So then that becomes an issue where all of a sudden now people are, you know, like, hey, wait a minute. Like, I feel like my rights are being infringed. The things that I'm paying for, you know, the social contract that I have, that I'm born in this country, I pay taxes and I follow these laws. But we have this thing called the Constitution. I have my First Amendment. I got my Second. Very few people know really what the Third Amendment is, which is always funny when people talk about the Second Amendment. I always say, hey, let's talk about the Third. You know, you got all these different amendments that guarantee us the inalienable rights that are guaranteed as a member of this country. And they're just suspended. So I think like that distrust, and then all of a sudden, you know, the situation pops up with, you know, with Floyd, and, you know, here's this, you know, obvious, you know, like, you know, terrible incident where the guy, you know, knee on the back and he dies. He's calling out for his mom and the whole deal happens. And, you know, everybody's sitting at home and is already in this kind of like little bit of confusion and fear. And like, I feel like, and now all of a sudden, here's the agent of the government, all of a sudden, you know, killing a guy by kneeling on the back of his head, and it's all over the news and here. And like, I mean, talk about like throwing the match into an already created vat of gasoline. Mm-hmm. And you see people like, you know, distrustful. And then the problem is Then you have the the governors and the mayors of all these people being like, oh, there is a problem, we're going to defund the police. And now all of a sudden they're coming and they flip flop. They went from, I'm going to send the police out to arrest you for my kids, to let's defund these people.
Right.
And it's so polarizing.
Insanity.
And it's insanity because there's zero consistency. And the problem is that the average person, is probably plugged way too much into the media and is not looking at this thing and being like, wait a minute, these guys were sending the police out to arrest us, and now all of a sudden a week later they're defunding it. They told us that we couldn't have protests and rallies because of the deal, but now all of a sudden they're burning stuff, but that's okay. So I think it just comes from this really just kind of confusing state, and it's like there's zero consistency. And I think people do well. I mean, I know as a father of kids that, like, when you raise kids, the one thing, and when people are like, oh, do you have any parenting advice? I'm like, be consistent.
Right.
Be consistent between you and your wife, and be consistent. If all of a sudden I say, hey, don't drink alcohol for my tell my teenage kids, you're not allowed to drink alcohol, and then every Saturday night they see dad get fucked up with a dozen beers sitting on the couch, then that's kind of disingenuous. Or if I say, hey, you need to exercise and eat well, but then I don't exercise and I'm stuffing my face with Cheetos all day,
Right.
and that doesn't make sense. Like I like the consistency. And I remember my mom told me a long time ago that if you want to have well-adjusted, healthy kids, be consistent in your message. If you believe fitness is important and being in good shape, then they need to see you train. If I say, hey, treat women well, treat every woman like she's your wife or your mother, and I don't treat my wife or my mother well, then that's disingenuous. So, or hey, you know what, you need to meet an honorable man. I tell that to my daughter, and then I run around on my wife and I treat her,
Sure.
poorly. So I think there's like just a level of consistency that children and people need, that I need as a member or as as a supporter and a lover of America, and feel very, I guess you could say very fortunate to have grown up here and grown up in the time at which I have. And I think for me, I grew up in Palos Verdes. I grew up in a, upper middle class white, place up on the hill, and was great because I played sports. So I was able to deal with all different, races and ethnicities and socioeconomic, positions. We played Inglewood and Compton. I mean, my dad grew up in Culver City. So, I mean, we were from LA, and, very just involved in, like, it wasn't as if we hid up in the bubble, but we were involved in going all over. And it was just, that was part of it. I mean, my dad was a criminal defense attorney. My brother does the same thing. I mean, my dad was in Inglewood court and LA court and here, and, clients of all different, races, colors, and creeds. So I think we were exposed to a lot, and I feel very fortunate to have grown up in such a way. And then I get a chance to go to Berkeley, which is probably one of the, the centers of the most polarizing place in terms of opposite to how I was raised. And it was extremely enlightening for me because I got to be around really smart people that had different ideas. Mm-hmm. And there was always this civil discourse and the ability to understand how this whole thing fits. And then I got to go, obviously play in the NFL, which is a pretty interesting dynamic because, as a white guy, I mean, I think Caucasians make up probably less than 15, maybe 20% at most. If you got rid of kickers, punters, and quarterbacks, you'd probably be somewhere around maybe 12, 10%. Right. So, you start working a job where, you are the minority, and the majority of my friends are Black and come from different places. Like my roommate on the road was one of my favorite people in the world, a guy named Bobby Williams, who was from East Texas. He was a Q out of Arkansas. And, dude, geez, if Bobby called me right now and said he needed my help, I'd jump in the car and go help him. Jason Dunn, who I played next to, who was our tight end in Kansas City. I hadn't seen him. I saw him at Tony Gonzalez's Hall of Fame deal. And it was funny. He came over and he saw me, and we just hugged him. He started crying. He's like, dude, I've missed you so much because these guys were, some of my best friends in the world. And I think the problem comes down to people don't know their neighbors. They don't know their friends, and they're not willing to go out. Whereas for me, a lot of these kind of society, whether it be race issues or whatnot, weren't necessarily an issue because these individuals were my friends. These people are, I was at their houses for Thanksgiving. I invited them over. When I get married, they were there. I mean, it's like, it's almost as if people don't know their neighbors, and they right. Through social media and all these other different mediums, they can just disassociate. And it's really just, it's kind of scary times, man. I feel very fortunate to growing up in this country, and I love the ideals as a fan of history and also of our founding fathers, and the vision that they had to be able to create something that has lasted this long is just inspiring. And I feel a sense of like I guess like duty and responsibility to make sure that I extend this to my own children. And I see a lot of people that don't necessarily like it and just want to burn it to the ground, and that just feels wrong.
Yeah. That was great, man. That was great, and great share. I posted today a short post, but I referred to this as our World War III, and I highlighted the fact that this was getting crazy, and it was the anniversary of D-Day, which was supposed to be the war to end all wars, and it was the last time the world completely came together to fight off, tyranny and fascism and but there's something happening here because this is spreading all over the world, right? They're rioting in London and in Europe.
Well, yeah, we I think we talked about the yellow vest riots that are happening in France. I mean, that's happening more because of the socioeconomic situations and the fact that the people felt like they were lied to by the government and they were being manipulated, But yeah, now all of a sudden those guys are rioting, and I don't know if you saw, I think it was in Bristol, UK. They pulled down a statue of a guy that was a slave trader from the 1700s. They yanked that thing down and poured it, put it right in the bay. We don't want this anymore.
Yeah, it's and I saw today they're calling for books written by white people to be burned, and just fucking crazy shit going on. I saw it. There was a meme that I saw on a scale. He starts it off on a scale of between 1 and 1984. What do you think?
Oh,
just very clever.
It's pretty interesting. I mean, if you look at and I was kind of thinking like what's Hollywood's responsibility in this stuff? Like if you think about 1984, you think about V for Vendetta. I mean, even people that have read Atlas Shrugged, Ayn Rand's book. I mean, the idea of fighting for something bigger and this evil conglomerate, and we have to do this, and we're in Clockwork Orange 1984, which is ironic because George Orwell wrote that in the 50s. So it's I just wonder if like the writing and the history and the Hollywood and the movies and all this other deal have just been stoking the fire and preparing for this. That this is my opportunity. I mean, I also was thinking back like so I think I remember reading years ago in college that less than like 3 to 5%, it was 3 to 5% of the United States actually supported the revolution and breaking away from England. That you really only need like 3 to 5% of a population or of a country to really overthrow and to be able to have this type of revolution. That the majority of the people just pay the money, leave us alone. And right. You think about like our founding fathers and these people, if they had lost, the Revolutionary War would have been quartered, hung, killed, and executed as traitors, and would be remembered as these violent traitors. But because they were able to fight the English back and create this country and doing this, I mean, they were revolutionaries of the highest order. I mean, if you read any of their stuff, it's extremely revolutionary. And so I think maybe the ideas that they put forth, and history remembers
winners.
Yeah, remembers the winners and is written by the victor. So if we had lost or they had lost, how would they be remembered? But because we remember them this way, and we flag and this, and we have 200 years, and the bicentennial, and now I mean, it's just interesting that maybe people are looking at it and being like, this is my opportunity to sign my Declaration of Independence. Where do I get to put my John Hancock?
Right. You mentioned Hollywood and the movies and stuff like that, and your reference to those KGB interviews, which I've seen some of them, not all of them. But if you look at the universities and what's been going on, I mean, for decades now, that's from many professors, and you see how outrageous some of the comments have been in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
That's really where it's happening. It's happening in homes, and it's happening in universities. And now you've got this like army of, there was, Jesse showed me today, CNN is interviewing a 7-year-old activist. A 7-year-old, how are you an activist at 7? Like, right? But I mean, it's just insanity. It's just insanity.
Yeah, I mean, it's in those KGB interviews, it's pretty funny because they usually the way that the kind of the Marxists and the communists kind of ride into the if you think about like a parasite riding its host, they find different groups that are kind of within that social fabric, the social, the social justice, the idea of this, social justice warrior, whether it be in universities or a group like Black Lives Matter,
Infiltrate,
that they infiltrate and they come in, and then as the guy said, once they come in and they seize power, the first thing they do is they execute those people because they have to, because they're the first ones that'll realize that, holy shit, this thing isn't going the way I want it. We've been duped. We've been sold something that isn't accurate. So they have to go in and they execute those people. I mean, that's what they did in Russia. That's what they've done. So, I mean, you think about like, the starvation and the famine that they had in Russia, was because they went in and they executed all the farmers. Anybody who they thought had more than them had to die. And they had to go in and have this mass execution of people that, have any type of social consciousness or understanding of what's happening. And, people that are like, whoa, we weren't going to get rid of them. So, right. And that's what he talks about, that, you got to ride on those guys back until they get you where you need to go. And then once you do, you kill them all. Crazy. So, I mean, I think if the people listening, like, go check that out. It's still on YouTube. It's extremely chilling.
I'll put the link.
Yeah, it's good. I mean, it just gives you an idea that, there's, I mean, and it's, history repeats itself. It happened in Russia. You look at, the Yanhai Shek and like, with the Chinese and that, like it's interesting. And there's definitely some agenda with that stuff. So, is there a social issue? 100%. I mean, there wouldn't be hundreds of thousands of people, rioting in the streets and protesting if there wasn't. So, I mean, the racial injustice and the thing that they're fighting against, the inequality makes total sense. To paint all cops as bad actors, I have a hard time because we know a lot of the cops personally. But, unfortunately, as a police officer, you're sworn into this deal and you take an oath. And when people, feel that oath has not been, fulfilled, then they're upset and this and, but then I'll tell you, like I said earlier, we've painted ourselves into this corner using the police as agents against the citizens in this lockdown with the COVID.
Premise. Yeah, it's a very good.
I mean, dude, we've already created this massive amount of distrust with law enforcement as our kind of agent of our most, like, I guess you could say, our closest touch point to the government, right? The president or these people come out, they decree this stuff. The president pushes it to the governor. The governor says we lock down. Ladies outside, neighbors call on that lady. The police show up and arrest her, right? Like,
right.
They are the big touch that that the people making the decisions, the ones who are saying you can't. Your job is non-essential. Well, this is how I put food in my family's mouth. This is how I provide. This is how I pay my mortgage. So what you're saying is that what I do in terms of like making a living, taking care of my family is non-essential.
Right.
That feels disingenuous and feels awful. And I think people were pissed off. And all of a sudden then you get, unemployment up 30% and you create this environment, which is like just gasoline. And then you needed a spark. And, the racial Black Lives Matter and that deal, was the spark that it needed. And, I just wonder if we hadn't been on lockdown with the COVID deal and this happened, like, would this thing have looked a little bit different? Would it have not have been so volatile? And then you get the, Antifa guys showing up, and I'm sure that's just one of the names. I mean, I'm sure there's a bunch of different organizations and what, I don't know. And then I also think that a lot of the misinformation and like, you get Fauci up there being like 2 to 3 million people are going to die. And then it's like, when you look at the numbers, it's pretty accurate to the to the amount of people that pass away with a common cold. So, I mean, with the flu each year, we had an extremely light flu season. Now all of a sudden COVID hits and the numbers are pretty consistent over every year. And then I love the, one life is too many to lose. And you're like, okay, well, how come we've never shut things down for a flu? Or, nobody's talking about the 650,000 abortions that happen in this country. So, I mean, like, there's a whole bunch of different stuff. Now, all of a sudden, people are pointing fingers, or the 300,000 people a year that die because of obesity-related diseases or deaths. So like, okay, so how come we're not shutting it down? How come we're not banning fast food? How come we're, so it's just, it's like a slippery slope. The minute you hit one, and then it's just these different moral positions. But at the end of the day, like these things are going to happen. You can't, tell people to hide inside and to, give up their livelihood and who they are and their identity. And then and it feels like a perfect storm, at least looking out for me.
Is, do you have any thoughts on, as far as, what's happening next, or are you kind of just rolling with the punches here?
I don't know what's going to happen next. I mean, I hope, I recently subscribed to the masterclass, and there's a really good one taught by Doris Keatings Goodwin, who was the wife of a really prolific speechwriter, and she's a historical or a presidential historian, and she talks about Teddy Roosevelt, LBJ, Lincoln, and I think one other, but I'm not calling it right now. But she made an interesting point that America is extremely durable. It's not that fragile. Mm-hmm. That in the face of all this stuff, America and the ideals will continue to survive as long as the people want it. And I believe that America is not fragile. I think America is dynamic. It's like no other country in the world because of the different pieces, that have come together. I mean, if you think about like, different countries, for the most part, people fit within, different, ethnic kind of groups. And, if you go here, you expect, like, if I go to Turkey, we're going to meet a lot of Turkish people. You're going to meet, people that are obviously displaced, but that there's an identity. Whereas America, I mean, people should identify as Americans. Right. You come from Canada. I'm an American now. I'm from Canada. So I think that it's just this huge melting pot of 330 million people. And I think as long as people understand the value and understand that, like, it's this is a pretty good place. Is it perfect? No, but that's why we can protest, and that's why we have these issues, and we can go out and, hopefully do the right thing and say the right things at the right point to continue to allow America to be able to extend on. Because what's the outcome? Okay, you want to burn it down? All right, let's burn it down. Like, let's war game this a little bit. So the Marxist anarchists come in, they burn this whole thing to the ground. Then what? What do they stand up? What is it? Just a free nation? So then I live in Texas. Does Texas become its own state? Do you fragment, splinter? I don't know. Like, nobody's talked about that. Right. I don't know. I mean, that's probably above my pay grade. There's probably somebody, within those groups that has some master plan that looks like them sitting at the top with all of us kind of below. But for the most part,
but if history repeats itself, we can look at socialists and Marxists and fascists other places and kind of hypothesize what the quality of life would be like.
Sure. But I mean, I can't think of a socialist society that didn't evolve into communism. Right. I mean, I got in an argument with a guy I went to high school with recently that said, socialism's not little communism. I'm like, show me one time where socialism hasn't given rise to it. Right. I mean, I guess in China they came in and seized, but for the most part, they're, you got to remember Joseph Stalin was a beatnik, socialist, and got into that thing, and I mean, that's kind of the way it works. So I don't know if a country of this size could go down that road. But I also think that there's, people that, and I always thought this was kind of interesting. Like, I'm always amazed at the people that hate the United States, want to burn the flag, run it over, hate everything about it, but are yet but don't leave and don't go anywhere else and stay here too. And I'm always like, yeah, like, if you don't like it, like, you can go anywhere. Like, there's people fighting to get in here for your spot. And yet, like, people, are just so happy that it's this. And I'm like, man, that's crazy to me. Like, is it perfect? No. But at the end of the day, we have things in place to to fix it if you're not happy. Like, you can register to vote, you can go down, you can run for Congress, you can become part of this thing. Like, oh, my vote doesn't matter. Well, yeah, because it's like the age old, like, a twig is weak, but a bundle of twigs is strong. So, like, like, there's community activism. Like, I really liked what Killer Mike, the guy from, the activist from Atlanta, had to say.
Right.
Like, you need to think, you need to organize, you need to strategize, and you need to go out there and vote and get people in place that are, looking to push, the issues that you see as important. And, then the other thing, though, is I think the media is so divisive. Like, if you turn it on, it's like, to the point of, like, is this is this being scripted by Hollywood movies? Like,
Right.
like they're,
Bad movies.
yeah, like, and I don't know, like, so, like I said, I've always been a fan of history, and I've always been a fan of presidents. I'm always amazed that, like, we have had, like, the right leader in the right place at the right time, that, Teddy Roosevelt and Abe Lincoln and these guys. And I don't know if they were just extraordinary men living extraordinary times, doing extraordinary things, or they were just average men who had the opportunity to be extraordinary, and history remembers them as such. So as I look at this thing, I see like a country divided on a lot of topics. And I think that the one thing that's been really universal for the presidents, and hopefully, at least when I think of, like, the president of the United States, and hold them in high regard, and I've been to, the Oval Office and seen it, and stood in the White House, and, felt a piece of that history, the ability to include everybody. The idea of, like, not create, the president doesn't need to be divisive, needs to, reach out and, refer to people and say, hey, we're all Americans. And what makes America great is everybody's entitled to their own opinion. We guarantee it with the First Amendment. But at the end of the day, we're all Americans, and then we should be able to have civil discourse. And, and I think that, I think for the most part, and I would, how do I say this? I think most Americans, you know, like, don't fit within these extremes, and it feels like the media just wants to publicize the most extreme nature of everything, so that it gives, like, because here's the deal. Like, if you turn on the media, you think everybody's fighting, but that's not what I feel like. I know my neighbors. I'm happy to see them. Like, I waved to everybody. I don't see it, so but just because I don't see it, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Well, no, but that's what they're doing. They're isolating, if we talk about police statistics, the millions of contacts, the arrests, the number of actual deaths, nobody's talking about all the lives that cops save. They're talking about and I had some guy on Facebook telling me, he doesn't like Larry Elder and Candace Owens and a couple other people because they always blame the black when they're killed by the police. And I'm like,
well, so here's the interesting thing. And like the problem is if you look at statistics don't always tell the whole story, but I think they tell a good tale. I mean, when you think about 330 million people in this country, how many interactions do the citizens a day have with police, and how do those, for the most part, go? And it's like, probably for the most part, they tend to go well, and some of them go awful. Are there bad actors in the police departments? 100%. Are all cops bad? No. That's like saying, like, everybody's bad.
right.
I think there's a lot of cops out there who are good people that take an oath, that hold it. A lot of them are my friends, and have worked for this company and understand what it means to take the oath and to help people and want to make a difference. And unfortunately, I think some bad actors end up kind of tainting it for everybody, but it doesn't mean you dismantle the system. But
Right.
if like, I'm always nervous on people that go too far one way to the other, where you got the lady who's calling out the police to go arrest people for leaving their house, but then all of a sudden it's going to disband the police department, and you're like, dude, these are so polarizing.
Right.
And I think, like I said earlier, most Americans are looking for consistency. They're looking for consistency in a message. And I know if I had the opportunity to be a president of the United States, I mean, my biggest thing would be to try to include everybody within this discussion. the problem is, and I just don't know if there's any benefit to the middle of the road non-crazy person. It's like, I hear what everybody's saying, but there has to be something in the middle, and there isn't. Is it
Right.
anarchy, or and it's pretty funny because when you look at like the Marxist anarchists, they're not that different than like the neo-Nazi on the other side. They're probably closer than most of America
Right.
is. That's like, hey, like, this is a pretty good deal. Like, is it perfect? No. Is there probably, some form of corruption in the government? 100%. Just for the fact that there's no term limits, that somebody can go to DC and be in politics and be in Congress for, 40 plus years. Like, to me, that's insane. Like,
Right.
George Washington spoke about career politicians being like, the destruction of this thing. And yet, there's no term limits. I mean, geez, those guys don't get in trouble for insider trading. What about that whole deal? Where all
Right.
of a sudden, right before the COVID, they get in briefed, and what do? They dump all their stocks, and then Martha Stewart went to jail for less, but yet we don't hold these people accountable.
Right.
So I think the problem is that we've given so much power, to these individuals that are able just to basically burrow in like ticks, that they no longer represent their constituents. They represent big business and who's going on in DC. And I think the problem isn't necessarily a social problem. It's our elected officials are not representing us in a way that we think that they should be. And I'm fucking appalled uh, at like the state of our government and the elected officials than I am at anything. Like,
Mm.
I see people want to raise their children and live their lives. And when you're in the Black community, you don't want to feel like if you walk outside, you're going to be profiled and shot and killed. Like, and unfortunately, whether or not that's a reality or not, statistically, it's how people are feeling, and therefore you cannot discount it. But at the end of the day, the elected leaders, and if you look at all these places that this shit's happening, it's all they've been run by the Democrats. I mean, you
Right.
think about like, and I don't subscribe to the two-party system. I sit within an independent, if not maybe more of a libertarian in ideas, where I search for less government. But if you think about it, you look at all these places like Detroit, like any place that the Democrats have been in for generations are absolutely in shambles.
Mhm.
So like if they're the party of the progressive and the party of like, the social right, then why is it that these places, there's not safe drinking water in Detroit?
Right.
So it's
You
confusing.
look at where like Minneapolis. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the whole thing. And the without getting too much more into politics, I mean, it's all
Well, the other one too, and I don't know if this is accurate or not, but I just read that the Officer Chauvin guy who ended up uh, killing Floyd,
killing Floyd. Yeah.
um, they worked together at a
Yeah,
nightclub for like 17 years.
it's true. Apparently.
So like I just saw that piece come out, and I'm like, wait a minute, how? So wait a minute, they knew each other ahead of time, that they both worked at this same club, and this guy was 17 years as a police officer, worked off duty security for this nightclub with this guy. Like, so wait a minute, like how like was
Is there
this
more
thing
to the story?
premeditated?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
yeah, is there more
That's what I thought.
information?
I read that the day after. I read that about 3 days after I learned that, and I was like, maybe they were shutting him up. I don't know.
Well, yeah, I mean, was who knows? I mean, was Chauvin the one in the back making the counterfeit 20s, and he took
Right.
them and was out pushing them? I mean, who knows? I mean, this is the stuff that you bring in uh, Oliver Stone to make conspiracy theory movies about, or conspiracy movies. But like, to me, that's valuable information. Is it something that just some random white dude puts his knee on the back with like a bunch of like guys standing around, that like one dude's Asian, one dude's of like, different ethnic
Right.
descents. And like, like the guy's calling out, and like they take him in and out of the car, bring him out. I mean, like, it's so crazy to me that, but like nobody's bringing that up. And like, yeah, I mean, uh, like the fact that nobody picked him up and just put him in a car, like, seems insane to me. Like, nobody rolled him on his side. Like it's just,
Yeah.
it's just complacent. It's
I
terrible,
heard. I
and,
mean,
and it's awful, and nobody deserves to die like that. But like that level of social injustice, like that guy should be charged, and he should,
and
be
he
dealt
is.
with,
He's done.
and
You
he
know,
is. And I mean, Trump came out and was like, "Hey, we're going to investigate this. This guy's going to, go to
this
jail.
is.
Like, this is wrong."
I just want to go on record as saying, because this whole thing of having, I know people whose moms died and they couldn't have a funeral,
Yeah.
and this guy's being made a martyr, and 5,000 people at his funeral,
Yeah. They
and
buried him in a solid gold casket. I
a
mean,
politician.
yeah, I mean,
Listen,
it's,
he was a bad guy who met a bad cop. The guy was a career criminal who, I don't know if you heard this story about him, during one of his home invasions, pointed a gun at a pregnant woman's stomach, you know, telling her to
I,
shut up. I
yeah,
mean, just,
I haven't done enough
yeah.
research to speak intelligently about who he
So
was.
before people freak out over what I said there, what happened to him, because I've written about this, was wrong. That cop
Yeah.
that was completely fucking wrong. But he was a bad man who got into a confrontation with a bad cop, and it didn't end well for both of them.
Yeah.
But he's not somebody. It's weird. There's something really, really wrong with this whole systemic racism theory. And if you really talk to people, there's enough going back to what you said, John, about the media and the government are complicit. Our leadership right now is just awful. I mean, it's just, you talk about, if there are parents, like it's not even that they're inconsistent. They're out fucking partying. We don't even know where the parents are.
Well, and the other thing which drives me absolutely crazy is we are entering an age that, like, this globalist economies, I mean, social media, I mean, people are digesting their information at it's not like my dad getting the LA Times on a Sunday morning and sitting and reading it cover to cover for 3 hours with 4 cups of coffee, and then sitting for the next 4 or 5 hours and basically giving us a dissertation of what's happening in the world. That the only way, I remember seeing Oliver North on the cover of, Time magazine. So then I had to read about the Iran-Contra stuff. I mean, whenever people are always like, and I love these fucking softball questions. Like, if you could sit on an airplane next to any famous person,
right,
who would it be? If you could go to dinner, one person, George Bush Sr., George H. Bush, who was, graduated from college, went to Texas to learn the oil business, was from the Northeast, and then gets involved, Skull and Keys, and, comes out and then goes to Venezuela Oil and becomes, head of the CIA. And I mean, fighter pilot. I mean, talk about the world's most interesting man. Like, that's the dude, and if you look at, I mean, probably one of the smartest, genius levels individuals on the planet is probably Putin. Not only a world-class chess player, he was head of the KGB, and now he's president. And, if you read, they've tried to piece it together, but they can't prove it, like, richest man on the planet.
Right.
But yet shows nothing, makes it look like he's a basic civil servant, which is insane to me.
Mm-hmm.
But like, you put him, and a guy like a George Bush Sr. In that situation, like, those are the individuals that I want to talk to. But like, yeah, I mean, those are the interesting people, the people that, I mean, that whole Iran-Contra stuff where we were down, like that stuff is so interesting to me. But the problem we run into is like you said, man, like, the parents are partying. Like, you got this weird fucking, like, looks like, it reminds me of like an aunt and uncle that hate each other for the last 50 years is what's going on with Trump and Pelosi. Like, it's so toxic, and she's so out of touch with reality. But yet, like, you have Trump, and I'm like, I constantly wonder, like, first of all, the fact that he still has Twitter, like, just blows my mind. And he tweets in the social media. It is the least presidential thing I've ever seen. And people support it in this. And I'm like, man, but then I also think maybe this is the generation we're living in, where people are so it's so unbecoming. Like, does the ghost of Teddy Roosevelt walk through the White House looking to fucking wake Trump up every 10 minutes because he can't sleep because of this? Like, it's just, when I think about the president of the United States and the person that's a leader of the free world, I think of somebody that can pull people to come together, that can give a speech, that has the ability to bring different sides together. And whether it's Republican or this, there's this idea that, two sides of the aisle come together and, to be able to govern and be able to push the agenda forward of America and helping the American people. And I don't feel like that. I feel like we're in a weird fucking power struggle with, Hillary was teed up, right? She didn't win. Trump comes in. So now they're going to spend his entire presidency
Trying to impeach him.
fucking yeah, well, yeah, I mean, well, it was oh, he cheated, and then it was Russia, then it was the impeachment. Yeah. I mean, it's just the entire strife. And what's amazing to me is that Trump at his age, with what he's done, and as a billionaire and the whole deal, whether or not you believe it or not, like, why the fuck does he want to do this? Like, who wants this job? Like, why the
Right.
fuck
I
does
mean,
he want?
I don't
Like,
look. I don't want to inject in something there because I've learned so much about you today, and I respected you before, but
in a good way or a bad
no,
way?
in a good way, man. Because we've known each other. When I trained with you in 2008 or 9, when you,
Yeah, we came out and taught a seminar at your gym.
yeah, and it was fucking amazing. And your co-presenter, I forget his name,
Rafael Ruiz.
Rafael, yeah, he was fucking amazing, and the course was great, and what you've done in the fitness space is great, and as a leader, as a mentor, as a guide. But I didn't know how educated you were. I didn't know about the Berkeley. I didn't know that your dad was a mayor, and so
my dad ran for Congress twice. He was a criminal defense attorney for 55 years. I mean, my dad graduated high school at like 16 years old.
amazing.
Early. I mean,
but I wanted to throw something for your consideration because of all of that through osmosis and also education. You grew up around politics,
yeah,
and so I hear you loud and clear about like, whoa, Trump shouldn't have Twitter. But I look at this era of Trump as this is like literally like I'm not a big Star Wars guy, so I don't watch all the movies. I've watched the first one, maybe the second one, but this is like the good and evil metaphor right now. That had Hillary gotten in, everything that's getting exposed wouldn't be. And so a career politician would never be on Twitter the way Trump is. He's a businessman. Yeah. He's a businessman who ran reality TV shows and Twitter. And it's interesting. You look at like Pelosi and Biden and all these other politicians and stuff. They're all on Twitter doing the same, like immature. Well, it's crazy.
Well, Pelosi's a pit viper of like, and I use that term of endearment, and I use that term because that's what my dad would call. My dad was a lobbyist in Sacramento. Worked as a lawyer and was always involved in California politics. I mean, we had Pete Wilson, who was the governor of California, came to dinner at my house, and I got to meet him. So like, it's always been, politics were always important. My dad worked for Richard Nixon on his campaign, on his reelection. Wow. I remember my dad still told me he's like one of the most intelligent, well-spoken people he'd ever met was Richard Nixon. History doesn't remember him as kindly and doesn't remember him for
he's
really
spinning in his grave right now. Looking at Obamagate and stuff.
Well, it's being involved in that, and like having and I always joke with the guys here at work that they didn't grow up with a really smart, condescending father the way I did, for the mere fact that like you have to be able to balance these positions. But this idea of constantly learning and looking at this stuff, and like I also think too, coming from a family of attorneys, it really comes down to being able to look at all of the information, and then also as a rhetoric major in college, being able to understand the arguments from both sides, because you have to be able to look at both sides to be able to effectively plan your argument. You have to understand and at least have some empathy or understanding of what the other person is going through, right, so that you can formulate your argument. And it feels like like Trump is swimming in deep waters. It's like that's the only thing I can say. Like there's a lot more at play than what we're seeing here. Like there's a whole bunch of other, this is like an incredible movie that has about 100 different subplots. And right, unfortunately, we're only being shown the one that our news outlets are pushing out to us.
Right.
And, these subplots are really what's pretty fascinating, and you wonder the effect of driving it. So, I mean, unfortunately, we don't have access to all the really good information. But I just know, like, I can understand the civil unrest of the population coming out of this COVID thing. And with kind of because I'll tell you this, as a citizen and as a viewer and as a father and a business owner and all these other stuff, I'm watching this and being like, okay, our civil responsibility talks about we don't want to overrun hospitals. We're going to shelter in place to flatten the curve. Totally makes sense. Give you a couple weeks. Then all of a sudden, remember, that just fucking narrative just went away. And it became this other thing about like, we have to hide in place, hide from this invisible disease, because if you get it, you'll die. And then all of a sudden I know people that get it, you know what it's like? Fucking headache and a cough. And then they're like, oh, even if you don't have it, you could be asymptomatic and you can spread it. And then it comes out that no, man, you can't spread it asymptomatically. And so the problem is, and then they're like, oh, millions of people were dying. Millions of people didn't die. So like it, you know, like it, you know, like the problem is that when you build this shit up and you tell people this and you take these fucking extreme measures, and then when it doesn't happen, instead of coming out and being like, we fucked up, we were totally wrong. Where's Fauci and his WHO come out and be like, I way overshot this thing and it fucked up the economy.
Just fucking apologize and move on.
Yeah, and apologize and come out and say, you know what, I didn't call this thing right. But I'll tell you, like the minute that I heard that dude worked for 5 different presidents, I was like, ooh, I don't know if I buy anything this dude's saying.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So then you start looking at like, you know, the WHO and all the, and, you know, like it just feels like, I'm like, man, like what's going on here? Like, why did the narrative change?
The guy advising the president on pandemic stuff shouldn't also be a businessman with patents.
100%. Like there should be, or he should stand up and say, hey, you know what? Like I have to recuse myself in this. But the problem is that it created a very, very volatile situation of distrust for, you know, the president and all these different agents. And then like I said, our forward facing, our touch point, our most realistic, you know, involvement with the government is the police. And now all of a sudden you have this people where people are distrusting the police. I'm going to have my kids play outside and these guys are coming out. And like, not to say all police, because I pulled up on my town and I saw a local police officer and I like rolled down the window. I'm like, what's up? And he's like, man, this is strange stuff. It's like I Am Legend around here, because there was nobody on the road.
Right.
And I kind of laughed and said, hey, you know, have a good day. And he, you know, took off and went back to the station. But I think at least if I watch the media, or if I watch TV, or if I'm on social media, it's like, you know, this lady I remember seeing, it was in Minnesota. She got arrested for having her kids play outside. And these cops were such assholes.
Right.
Like, you know, like just this fucking totalitarian bullshit that they're, you know, pushing this person's agenda. And I remember telling people, I'm like, and this is pre-Floyd deal, this is pre-this. I told the guys, and I said it on the podcast, like this is creating a distrust and is tarnishing law enforcement, because they're going out and they're basically violating people's civil rights, like my ability to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. You are taking those away from me. And and my comment to the guys, and this is so foretelling, is like, this will not end well if people don't trust the government in terms of the agents with police officers, because there's a social contract, right? We have this social contract, which is, I grant you the right, the badge that you're wearing and the gun, I am granting you the right to govern and to police us. So the social contract of me granting you this is what allows me. I vote in a chief of police. He hires agents. They have cars with stickers, and we've, you know, basically thrown our cards in on this social contract. And my comment is, what happens when the social contract ends? And then I'm on the street and I see this guy who's got a badge and a gun in this, but he's a bad guy trying to enforce something that I don't like. And he pulls a gun on me and I pull a gun, and I'm like, this isn't going to end well. I don't believe in this social contract. That badge no longer has value. And like, that's what happens when agents of the government are agents of tyranny. Is, if you believe any of the John Locke stuff, the idea that when the social contract expires, when all of a sudden it doesn't benefit both sides, or one side takes liberty that they're not supposed to, you know, and like whether or not you buy into John Locke. But so like, that was my comment to the guys at work and the people, and even on the podcast, was like, this is setting a bad precedent. And more importantly, it's setting us up for something very volatile that potentially could happen. And then all of a sudden this thing hits. And it's like, dude, like, you know, and now all of a sudden,
so it's mostly like, your fault. What you're saying is you kind of made this happen.
Yeah. No, I mean, but and then even when I watched it, I was like, this is fucked up. Like, this is bad. Like, this is awful. Yeah, like the guy might be a career criminal. He might be a bad dude, but nobody deserves to die like this. And if he's a bad dude, we have due process. He needs to be taken down to the station. You know, his civil rights not violated, needs to be booked. And if he's a bad dude, then we have laws in place to deal with these people. They don't die in the streets with a knee on the back of their head. I don't care if you're a felon or you're a bad dude or whatever. Like, nobody deserves to die like that, because that's not the way. Like, this isn't Roy Bean in the 1800s Wild West in fucking Tombstone, where they go out and they shoot somebody down because he's a fucking spitting on the sidewalk. Like, this isn't what America's built on.
Right. I had a cop send me a very long, I'm not going to read it, but a very long letter, but I want to read one paragraph. He's talking about the whole defunding, dismantling, and he said, name another profession where you're expected to be as knowledgeable on the law and legal updates as a district attorney, as articulate and concise as an English grammar major, as empathetic and communicative as a local community outreach worker, as skilled at de-escalation as a hostage negotiator, as skilled a martial artist as a professional MMA fighter, as skilled at shooting firearms as a sponsored USPSA shooter, and physically fit as a collegiate athlete, and as skilled at defensive driving as a NASCAR racer.
Yeah, sounds about right.
Right, and it's I'm going to get this published. There's a lot more to it, but he's just like, the police need extra funding, not defunding, so you can hire the right people. Tim Kennedy wrote a really good post about that we need to hire the right people, and there needs to be budget there to train them properly. And I got to ask, like in one of the jousting bullshit matches I had online, where someone said, blah blah blah, and I was like, dude, if you don't break the law, you're probably going to change your chances of something bad happening to you. There's very, very few incidents of just this, like, I don't want to open up this can of worms. Just this, like, random, the police run in and just kill innocent people.
Well, I mean, but they do. I mean, the whole like deal where that lady, they basically did a knockless warrant, kicked it in, and her and her boyfriend thought that they were getting fucking home invasion, reached for a gun, and they shot them both. Right. And then they found out they were in the wrong house. Now, does that happen? No, but it does happen. So the problem is I hate speaking in absolutes. There's a great book called Thinking in Bets that Luke, who works for me, had me read, and it really made me stop thinking in these absolutes, where it's like, oh, this never happened. Well, no, it does. And here's one instance that it does. And like, is that a fuck up? Yeah. I remember years ago. So like I said, my dad was a criminal defense attorney. He was a DA before that. And before that, he was a probation officer. And he made an interesting point to me when I was 16 years old. He's like, when you get pulled over by the police, just know that's going to be probably the closest you're ever going to be to death in your life. And I was like, what do you mean? He goes, the amount of people that I know that have died at traffic stops because of something. And he's like, so his whole deal to me, he made me promise him, he's like, when you get pulled over, right, roll your windows down, turn your car off, put your hands outside the deal. Yes, sir. No, sir. When they ask you, why I pulled you over? Nope. I'll just get the ticket. And he said the faster that you can reduce your contact with the police, your survivability goes up. And so when I ever get pulled over, they always come over, you've been drinking? No, nothing. I'll just take the ticket, whatever it is. I won't argue. My dad always said, he's like, hey, I would much rather you get a point, take the ticket, I'll represent you, than you get involved in something that escalates, it doesn't end well for you. So your job when you get pulled over is for you to get away as quick as you can with that ticket, and then I'll go deal with it. And that always stuck with me. And I'll tell you, like, I remember the last time I got pulled over in Newport Beach. And the irony of this was I stayed late at the gym when I owned Balboa, and I was training one of the detectives for Newport Beach. And he had to come in late. I came in, we were training 8 p.m. He left. I was driving, and I totally rolled to stop. Like I did the, typical STOP, slow to observe police. So I rolled it. And the cop was about 4 blocks behind me. He saw me, he lights me up. And as he's walking up to the car, and this is 8 o'clock at night, Newport Beach, I pull into a service station, well lit, turn the car off, roll the windows down. I'm in a truck, 4-door truck, roll all the windows down, no tinted windows. No music, nothing. I mean, I'm wearing like, t-shirt and shorts, and the guy rolls up to the door, gun out, and asks me, do you have steroids in your car? And I fucking laughed, and I was like, why? And I, of course, typical me, I was like, why, are you looking to buy some? At which point he fucking starts to raise his gun. And I was like, whoa, we're all good here. I just got done training one of your detectives, and told him the guy's name. He goes back to the car, calls the guy, and the guy's like, yeah, it's John Welbourn. Dude, his brother's a defense attorney. Dude played in the NFL. He owns the gym I train at. And so then the guy comes back in his demeanor. So I see him, I see him, I get away from the stop, obviously. But when I go back to train this dude, he's like, how'd that go? And I told him. And he was like, like this is fucking Newport Beach, but so like that's just one of interaction. Now is that guy, I don't know what that guy would happen to that guy earlier today. I don't know why he would fucking profile me like that. I don't know any of that stuff, but my job is to get away from it. I was very fortunate to play in the NFL for almost a decade. And as a minority white dude in the NFL, had a ton of black friends, and the amount of stories that those guys had with run-ins from college and the NFL and this in terms of like with law enforcement were less than stellar. And so I feel for, but here's the problem. I'm in a way different position in that I worked in a job that was predominantly with black dudes and, big, strong dudes that, had money and this and, and they all had different stories. And so I think when this thing comes out, like I have a easier time being able to be like, no, like this is a problem. Like this is definitely a problem. But I also met a ton of nice cops, and I've had a ton of really, really solid interactions with police and worked with them. So the problem is like, how do you temper those good guys with those bad guys, and how do you do it? Like, like you said, Tim Kennedy, like you got to have more funding. You got to be able to get rid of bad cops quicker. But the problem is the strength of the police unions it's like getting rid of a bad teacher. You can't do it. The unions are so strong. So I think they have to be able to assess and get rid of those guys quicker, and they have to put more money, not defund them, get better trained,
Right.
more capable individuals into that job, not just the dudes like, I guess I'll go be a cop, like it just blows my mind.
No, listen, one thing I've been repeating, all throughout all this is like, there are bad cops, but it's because there are bad people. That bad guy who became a bad cop could be a bad doctor, a bad politician, a bad lawyer.
Sure.
Bad people. And like in 2019, there were 1,100 police deaths. In the same year, they were estimated between 220 and 440,000 deaths at hospitals from, accidents, that shouldn't have happened. And I know people go, yeah, but there aren't racist doctors. Well, you don't know that,
Well, I mean, there very well could be. I mean, right. The idea with the interesting thing with something like racism, it was really interesting. Like, so, I mean, here we are in 2020. I went to college in 1994, and I graduated with my undergraduate in 98, and then did my in 97, then did my master's in 98. And I remember 1994 like it was yesterday, for the fact that I was a freshman in college, 18 years old, and I'm sitting in a class. It was called Education 40, and was taught by a guy named Professor Pedro Noguera, and him going in there, and it was talking about not only racism but interracial, like mixing within the education system, and he used education as like a socioeconomic in the entire class. And it was really interesting because I got a chance to go to his office hours, and he was pretty funny to me. He's like, "You play football, huh?" I'm like, "Yeah." He's like, "Don't wear that shit to class." He's like, "I don't want to see you wearing your football stuff to class." He's like, "The problem is if you wear that as a white dude, people are going to treat you different. So dress up a little bit, look a little nicer. I see you wear glasses, wear those every day. And when you come into the class, believe me, you're not going to do yourself any favors by, speaking from, the position in which you're from and this." And he goes, just listen to what people have to say. Because at the end of the day, your job and your goal is to get through this class with the best grade and navigate this to the greatest success. And I'm telling you, don't fuck it up. And, and I sat in class and I listened, tried to understand, the position on this institutional racism and this, and like, whether or not it exists, and you believe the studies, or if you listen to Candace Owens versus this, however it is, these are social issues that people have been talking about since, long before the civil rights movement. So if these issues are coming up, like we have to deal with them in a way that both sides are understanding that, and I hate that people are like, "Oh, this doesn't exist. The statistics say this doesn't exist." I'm like, there wouldn't be hundreds of thousands of people out there protesting if they didn't feel like it existed. So it's disingenuous just to fucking cast them off. Oh, the statistics don't say that there's bad cops. Well, one guy died and we saw it on video. So obviously there's one. So now the problem is when you speak in absolutes, it fucking, one person disvalues it. So, I mean, these are interesting times, man. But I think for all of this stuff, there's never like, these are the like this is like the family, you know, like you think about like, oh, you know, from the outside everybody's family like looks really good, and you get up and there's all this fucked up stuff in the family and this and so, you know, like this is what it is to live in America. But you don't burn the motherfucker to the ground and dismantle it to put in some fucking communist Marxist regime, some socialist bullshit, because you're unhappy with you know, with where we are within race relations. So like that's the problem I have is like, you know, when I see anarchists or people out there like burning stuff to the ground and, you know, burning American flags and this, I'm like, that doesn't do anything. All it does is it creates sides for this thing. And this doesn't, and when people get into these polarizing sides, they stop communicating and they start just throwing punches, and that doesn't help anybody.
Yeah.
So it's frustrating for me, because if I want to raise my kids in a world that's, you know, better and more evolved and you know healthier in this, like we have to have these hard conversations. And the problem is when you go to have these conversations, if they're done in such a way, it just fucking turns people off, man, and they just put up their fists and want to start throwing punches.
It's you know, so you said it's the cancel generation, so you can try and be lucid and approachable, and I don't know, we could talk for hours on this shit.
It's you know, I'll go back to what I said when we opened, man, like we're living in interesting times that, you know, we you have a country with these levels of freedom, but like I'll tell you this, like the COVID thing was really enlightening for me, because I've always believed that we have like this inherent freedom that, you know, life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Like I'm guaranteed like the First Amendment, right to free speech. You got the Second Amendment, which guarantees the First Amendment, you know, my right to due process, my right to assembly. And you go through all these things. And then all of a sudden we have a pandemic,
right?
That like I knew one person that got it and he had a cough. Like it's a really weird thing, but yet you turn on the media and it's like, you know, so-and-so, like I saw one talk, this like 41-year-old guy wasn't feeling good, went to the hospital. They immediately put him on a respirator, and then he had a heart attack and fucking all this like terrible shit. And I'm reading it and I'm like, and they're like, oh, we all have to stay inside because of this. No, you don't put that motherfucker on a respirator. Pull up the studies. 80% of people that go on respirators have heart attacks and strokes. Like the problem is he went to the hospital. Like, it's just, I don't know, man. Like, I don't think that they're doing that. The media and whatnot is doing anybody favors. And I don't think Trump's doing himself any favors. And I don't think Pelosi's doing any favors. I think what it looks like is an extremely fractured, ego-driven group of individuals that aren't representing this thing the way they need to. And, you know, at the end of the day, I'm a fan of America. I'm a fan of the ideals. I'm a fan of what our founding fathers preached and what they wrote and the genius of it and the dream that they had. And I think it's worth fighting for. I think at some point people want to tear it down, but I think there's got to be a way to be able to like have some civil discourse to figure a way through it.
I agree. And I think what your college professor shared with you is wise words. You've got to not stand out and not kind of self-identify as the opposition, but find a way to create, and it's not even to be a chameleon, but to find a way to
don't be an asshole. Create. Like it's really not that hard. Like, don't be an asshole. I mean, and I fucking hate that people are like insensitive assholes. Like, I might not like, so here's the problem. And this, like, just to talk about another problem that we like, but I think people fail at the margins of their experience. To quote Greg Glassman, who said that to me many a times, people fail at the margins of their experience, and I use it constantly. So because my experience doesn't take me over that edge, that doesn't take me the margin. Well, I've never experienced any form of bad interaction with the police. They've always been great for me. So therefore it doesn't exist. And, I went to a place like Berkeley where I got to see a whole bunch of different people from different ideas that had this melting pot, and I got to sit in classes and have arguments and talk and listen and do all this. So then that extends my margin. Mm-hmm. I got a chance to go play in the NFL and work as a minority, which I think is funny in a job like that. But like, I got to see what it was like to be on the other side. So that extends my margin. I'm an avid reader and a fan of history and understanding this stuff and, the Constitution and like that extends. I had a extremely intelligent, very thoughtful father who, and condescending in a lot of ways, but was always basically striving for more education and for us to be well spoken and intelligent and well thought out. And so that when people listen to this, that I'm just not John Welbourn, I'm Bob Welbourn's son, that Robert Welbourn's son is a intelligent, switched on individual. Like that was something that was important to my father, that when I went out and played football, I had Welbourn on the back, that I wasn't just representing me, I was representing everybody with that last name, which includes to my daughters and my wife and my kids, and that we represent ourselves in such a way that that is everlasting. And and then also being a football player, and I'm a big white dude, so therefore I got to be a fucking idiot, right? Because I like to lift weights, and I basically for a living beat my head and fists into people, so obviously I'm not as smart as everybody else,
right?
And dispelling those myths. So it's just, man, it's like and I know it's been beat to death, but like I always think, like if you look in, if you're a fan of Malcolm X or Martin Luther King or any of this stuff, Dr. King would be considered so passive and mild today. Like you think about how revolutionary Malcolm X was, he would be considered probably conservative too. But like you think about Martin Luther King and the idea of like one day when like race doesn't matter, that people are judged on the quality of their character. Like I somehow have always believed that, and unfortunately, like that's not happening today. That people aren't being judged on the content of their character. They're basically being judged on their virtue signaling and a whole bunch of other bullshit. And and now it's like, okay, so and so does some good, but said something in the past and this, and it's just this cancel call out culture is fucking crazy, and it's dangerous, So, but at the end of the day, don't be an asshole. And if you're not an asshole, do you really get called out? So,
right.
I don't know, dude. I feel like we're still trying to solve the world's problems here with two dudes that really just like to punch each other in the face.
Right. But sage advice, man. And it was fun. Mostly.
Dude, we didn't talk about fear.
We don't have to. But we did. The whole show was about fear. Without you.
Tony, I think we talked about this once, or maybe we didn't. That I know this is crazy. I have always found comfort and loved violence.
Right.
Like I got to do a violent job. I got to be a violent individual, paid money to do violence on behalf of old rich men, that own the NFL. And it's pretty interesting when like that type of like physical violence, whether it's fighting or on the field, you like gain a level of comfort. But like what's pretty interesting is like then you see like emotional violence, like kind of what we're seeing play out in this country, and it's so different. Like I like the cold calculating, get in the ring and like the chess match of fighting, seeing people running with tears in their eyes, throwing, fire bombs. Like,
right. Well, that resonates with a side of me that many people don't realize, having trained military and law enforcement for decades, a lot of these guys, when I would go train a unit, they would, guys would show me a picture of like, what was left of a bad guy or a video. And I never looked at any of that stuff. I never, all the decapitations online, all that stuff. I abhor violence. People didn't understand that. They thought because I've studied it for so long and because I've taught it for decades that I must be like a knuckle dragger, really into the whole violence stuff. I abhor violence, which is why I practice it. Yeah. And, but I understand that. I love a good MMA fight. I love a good boxing match. I love a good jiu-jitsu match. I love calculated, strategic, intelligent violence. But what you were describing there, seeing people crying, people scared, people freaking out, it's disgusting. It's appalling.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, is this the currency in which we have to change or trade for social change? And that's the question I run into, is like, only when people go to these extremes is that what causes some form of social change. And I constantly think about the currencies we travel or we trade in. Like one of our friends tried to go to CVS and they wouldn't let him in because he wasn't wearing a mask. And he's a smart dude. He's a doctor, and started quoting all this research. And he like called to me like, what do you think? And I'm like, well, dude, that's the currency. right? Like the person there, like they just know the policy of which they were told. They don't know anything about your research or that you're a doctor. You're just a dude that comes in without a mask. If that's the currency that allows you to go to CVS to get what you need, trade in the currency that makes people, that people are comfortable with.
Right.
I read all the research on the masks. It's pretty like ambiguous. Like, it doesn't work. It does. Like, sure. All right. Well, then you know what? Like, if you're not going to require me to wear one, I'm probably not going to wear one. But if I got to wear one to CVS, I got it in my pocket and I'll throw it on, because that's a currency in which I have to trade. And I constantly think about this stuff with the currencies that people are trading, like the idea of like acknowledgement, right? Like, hey, this is a problem. The currency that'll get you shut down and the currency that'll get you fucking curb stomped will be pretending that this doesn't exist and this is bullshit and that you're imagining all this. And I think, like, when we get to the point of like, trading currency and, how we're going to discuss, like, that has to be something that people look at. And I think if you're, unfortunately the currency today, if you're an insensitive asshole or, somebody that's a dick about it, then you know what, people are going to fucking go hard at you and they're going to fucking come for you. And we're seeing it today. So, at the end of the day, like, understand the currency that people are trading, be rational. And at the end of the day, I would hope that self-preservation, whether it be like, this is another one that blows my mind. I mean, people show up to these protests, and like are getting killed. Like, you saw that dude go to defend his bar and he got all fucked up and killed and with a machete. And
Right.
like, what was that dude like, what did that guy think he was going to do, that he was going to go out there with a machete as an unskilled fighter with no experience to go out and defend the bar that he goes to? Like, I always think that people will always do what's in their best interest for the preservation of their lives.
Mm-hmm.
So it's confusing to me when I see people that don't. And like, I saw that and was like, what the fuck was that guy thinking? Like, but then I have to remember that there's a whole bunch of unrational, emotionally driven individuals that are not cold and calculating, that aren't used to violence.
Right.
Like, the one thing, like, and I joked that with the guys for years, like, I considered myself not a football player, but a master of violence, because I understood violence and it was comforting and quieting. And that, like, in the most violent kind of turbulence times, I found like the most peace and quiet and the most comfort. But because I'd been conditioned into that, most people, and you've seen this, Tony, people, like, the first fight they get into, they start crying uncontrollably. Like, if I see somebody get into a fight and they start crying, I know this is their first fight.
Right.
You see a dude go to get into a trouble and all of a sudden he gets like real quiet, and then you look and he's got some fucked up ears. He's been in a lot of fights. Or you look at a dude that's got a bunch of broken knuckles and this, and you're like, look at that dude's hand. How did he get that hand? Right. Or the tooth that lodged into this one. And you look at these, or the scars on my face. I mean, those are all tells. And as you know, man, if you get a tell before it, that's like getting a tip in poker.
Right.
So, yeah, man.
Crazy times, man. Hey, listen, we're at 92 minutes.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so long-winded.
No, it's fascinating, and I can't wait to release it. But I do want to. I don't want to lose people, but I want to leave them with just a little bit about what are you, separate to trying to save the world, which you accomplished in the last 92 minutes. What are you up to with it? Since, like, fast forward 2008 or 9, I did your course, CrossFit football, became power athlete.
Yep.
You moved from California to Texas. Things are great there. So fast forward to what are you doing now? What's your company doing? Who do you serve?
Yeah, my company's Power Athlete. Retired from the NFL in 2009, and was approached by CrossFit about coming in and teaching a specialty seminar for them based on kind of strength, power, and speed. And it was really interesting in that if you look at all the SMEs and all the other programs that were associated with CrossFit, they were teaching an element of CrossFit. What I was tasked for was actually developing my own version of CrossFit that would be used within the realm of sport. So CrossFit sat on the realm of like fitness. Right. I was on the realm of performance, and while fitness, they're strange bedfellows, to use a term. And I became really focused on this idea of performance and fitness just being an element of that. And so we taught that seminar for a number of years, hundreds of seminars around the globe, every continent. And, then that relationship ended. And years before, I'd started my parent company, really, which is Power Athlete, which is my ideal. And we got really heavy not only into the education space, but also into helping people develop online, kind of fitness technologies. We started, pushing out private programming in 2012 and starting to understand that space, and then working with different companies and just being a really good sounding board for them. We have, thousands of people a day that follow our training programs around the globe. We certify, coaches within our methodology based off of, my training experience of the last 30 years. And then, and I always say, hey, I stand on the shoulders of giants with some of the best strength coaches in the world, and just being able to develop a system that allowed me to play at the highest level in the NFL for a decade. So that's really what you see within Power Athlete. And then we certify coaches, like I said, within our methodology, and we call our Block 1. So we do a ton of online programming, do a bunch of tech stuff, and really just make some really, really switched on badass coaches, so that if you're working with athletes and somebody walks in the door, you know exactly what to do. There is no, hey, you're a rugby player, so today we're going to do 400-meter run, 50 air squats as your training program. No, if somebody comes in and is training for performance and has a real goal that looks like sport performance or whatnot, there's a way to achieve that, and be able to take them on that journey. And I think that's what we do very, very well. And we run our own podcast, Power Athlete Radio, 350, 60 episodes in. Tony, you were just on it, recently, which has been really pretty interesting for us, just for the mere fact that when we started the podcast, I had no idea. I'm like, do people really want to listen to us? But what I realized was that the podcast allowed me to connect with people and create this amazing genealogy of individuals like you and other greats, and like some of the smartest people on the planet have been on our podcast, and we call them friends, and I'm able to share ideas, and it's allowed me as an individual to grow at such a rate that education and growth are so important to me. And I felt that when I was in college, I was this sponge. And then I went to the NFL, where it was play football, travel, it was mundane, and it was kind of superficial. And when I retired and all of a sudden got into this and kind of traveled in space and learning and time and company and development and growth and trying to make people the best versions of themselves, it really jump-started something that I felt had just been on life support for 10 years. I read and did stuff, but not like today. Now I'm I want to devour information. I want to, lift weights and train. I want the people around me to be the best and brightest and the smartest individuals, so that they can push me to be the best and the brightest individual I can. And, I've been very fortunate to have, amazing people on our podcast and interact. I mean, the talk we had on our podcast with you about fear, was amazing. And I just kind of get done with this stuff, and it's I joke with the guys, and I know they hate when I say it, but I'm like, it's almost like chicken soup for my soul, where I feel recharged and energized and creative and learned, and there's something new for me to go and attack and learn in this. And I think the problem is I wish more people got into this kind of and I'm not meaning self-help books. There's a million of those, but actually sitting down and understanding things that are, understanding history and this and all these other pieces, and being able to pull it together to make coherent arguments that aren't just emotionally based crying. So that's what I'm doing. And I got an amazing wife who puts up with me, and I got 3 badass kids. And I really enjoy the guys I get to work with, and the community that I've created at Power Athlete of just really like-minded individuals. Like I always say, man, I didn't need 10,000. I don't need 100,000. I don't need 1 million. Just give me a few hundred or even 1,000 like-minded badass individuals that are all moving in the right direction, and we'll fuck some shit up.
We may have to call you guys.
Yeah. Oh, dude. I'll tell you, the Power Athlete Nation is deep and strong and well-trained. We have, we train some of the baddest dudes on the planet, and, we count them as friends. So hopefully they're listening and know how much I love and respect them.
That was great, man. That was this was a great call, man. I fucking, huge respect. Hopefully it's well received. I'm never sure, I know who your audience is, and, I don't ever mean to disrespect or say anything, but I think we're in an interesting time, man. And, I think people just need to be honest and really just, hey, Well,
If you don't understand a situation, then put your hand up and be like, I don't understand. Explain this to me.
right. No,
But I need to be willing to learn.
Simple rules. Fucking sit down, listen, talk, seek to understand. Don't be an asshole. Simple rules.
It doesn't seem that hard, but unfortunately people are making it fucking hard. And I think it's because of social media. Like, I think this thing is so, like, it allows you to not have to sit with your neighbor. Like, it allows us all these communications where I don't think we're evolved like this. We're, if you read the book Tribes or you look at any of the evolution stuff, like, we grew in these small groups, like these small collectives of individuals where there was some form of accountability. Now people can hide behind their fucking keyboard and, say whatever they want. And unfortunately, that's bullshit, because you should be in a situation where if you say something that's stupid, you get punched in the face.
Right.
Maybe not literally, but like, people call you on your shit, but that doesn't happen, because then what do? They just shut the computer. Fuck you.
Right.
So
you're blocked. You're done.
Yeah. So,
dude, we could talk about this shit forever, and maybe we will. But it was great having you on the podcast, and we will put all your contact info and help.
I'm easy to find at John Welbourn. I don't hide from anybody, and you can find us if you put in Power Athlete into the Google, and our URL is Power Athlete HQ, and we're on social and we're everywhere. And so we're easy to find.
Most of my audience are law enforcement, military, martial artists, fighters, CrossFitters. So, I mean, most of them know who you are already, and the ones that don't will now, and they'll go check you out. You always have great content out there, and you post some very funny memes as well.
I don't post them. I have a collection of memeologists that I'm going to call, and I'm going to use the word meme, because I know Callie, who does our podcast, hates it, but I'm going to call them memeologists, that come up with some stuff that, like, I laugh. I'm like, I don't know where y'all got this, but this shit's great.
That's great. Dude, John, so good to catch up, man. And we'll have you on the show again for sure.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity. And, stay safe.
You too.